Hello, I'm Dalton Delan. I'm a columnist for the Berkshire Eagle, and this is Eagle Reels, where we take you beyond the news. My very special guests today, filmmaker Jeff Bieber and president of Bard College, Leon Botstein. Welcome, Jeff. Welcome, President Botstein.
Great to be here, Dalton.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Jeff, I'm going to start with you because you've got a film coming up June 27th, Friday night at 9, PBS nationally on American Masters. And you and I both worked for many years in public television, and people probably think when they hear that there's this film on Hannah Arendt that you must have cooked this up after the election. Tell me, when you began work, did you have any idea how timely this would come to be?
Yes and no. We did work together on Washington Week, and we both had a front row seat on politics in our nation's capital. And after covering, I was executive producer covering the unfolding riots on January 6, 2020, that nearly stopped the peaceful transfer of power. I started to seek out answers to what was unfolding in our country. And I kind of came upon the work of Hannah Arendt and I had read a little bit of hers, Eichmann in Jerusalem, but I started diving into more of her work, especially Origins of Totalitarianism. And that led me to start developing a film about her life and work. And that led me to Bard College because Bard has this Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities. And I contacted President Botstein, who's not just the president of Bard, but I later learned a former student of Hannah Arendt, and he is featured in my film.
Thank you. President Botstein, you studied with Hannah Arendt. You've got the center there. Can you tell us about your experience personally and and the work of keeping her alive and teaching her at the college?
So I entered the University of Chicago as a 16-year-old in 1967, and I come from a family of European, Russian, Polish Jews who survived the war, and we came as children with our parents, stateless to the United States in the end of 1949, and I was a very small child. And my grandfather, who survived both camp and ghetto, was a very sophisticated and very well-educated individual. He had done 2 years of his university study in Germany, although he was a Russian Jew. And he was interested in philosophy and politics. Long story short, after the war was over, they couldn't get in the United States, and they went to Mexico City, and they lived there until in the late 60s, in their 90s, really, my grandparents moved to the United States. He didn't speak any English, but he read English. And Hannah Arendt's report on the Eichmann trial, of course, my parents too, read everything that came out on the war years. I remember when the pianist Spielmann's memoir came out in Polish in the 60s, they read it. I was off to college, and I had lived with my grandparents in Mexico City for summers. And so he said to me, you should read these essays in the New Yorker, and which he read very carefully and painstakingly, because he didn't really read English, didn't speak English. And he said, this is the most honest, most penetrating writings on the Holocaust that I've read. So when I became, in my first quarter of my first year at Chicago, Hannah Arendt had just arrived as a professor on the Committee on Social Thought. And she gave a public lecture on the Eichmann book, which had by then appeared in book form. And the place was packed, and I was 16. Now, what did I know? And I walk into this room, and I'd grown up in a Jewish community and member of a synagogue with my parents. And the place was packed by angry people, really angry people. I'd never really seen such a crowd. And people accusing her of this and that, and of blaming the Holocaust on them, and for not understanding the circumstances and so on and so on. And it was brutal. And when it was over, as in many academic lectures, people go up to talk to the speaker. And I remember what my grandfather had told me, and he had been a prominent member of the Jewish community in interwar Poland, and in Lodz, in the second largest city. And he was actually asked to be on the Jewish council in Lodz and refused. So I waited my turn. I came up, and she looked at me, and I said, I apologize, I'm only a first-year student here, but given what happened, I wanted you to know that my grandfather, whose name she knew something about because the Polish historians had asserted that he had been shot by the Germans after Lodz was occupied, which wasn't true. He fled to the Russian side and then eventually survived. And that having survived both the ghetto and camp, that he wanted me to know that what she had written was the most profound and penetrating analysis of what happened. And she looked at me and she said, you're a student here? I said, I just arrived, first-year student. He said, well, why don't you come to my office hours, which are on Thursday? This must have been on Tuesday. And I did. And from then, we remained in contact, and I audited classes with her, and she helped me with my senior thesis, which was on this German sociologist Max Weber, one of whose pupils was Karl Jaspers, her mentor. And the reason people find me is because she wrote Jaspers about me. So I appear in the Jaspers correspondence. When famous people die, the people who knew them multiply, exponentially, And there's no way to, I sat on a bench with, Thomas Jefferson, who can verify stuff like this? And in my case, unfortunately, there's a paper trail, the correspondence, and then she left her library. I had lunch with her a couple of weeks before she died. And then she was really instrumental in my getting the job at Bard, because her husband had been a faculty member at Bard, which is why she's buried there. And Heinrich Blücher. And I was so young that she played a very crucial role in persuading the senior faculty not to humiliate me and throw me out the door. So I owed her the gift of a successful transition to this job. And she also was planned to retire from the New School and move up to their part-time to their country home across from Bard and teach, help me out as a young president to try to rebuild the college. And so that's how I met her.
What an incredible story. A quick question for our viewers and readers who are not necessarily familiar with her. And later I might ask you about some of the writings, but here's a simple one. If in the popular mind now, as we're all thinking about, many of us, totalitarianism, decline of democracy, how democracies die, what, sort of in bookstores, you'll have like, well, if you like this, you like this. Who is she kin to? Is she kin to George Orwell, who we naturally think about in totalitarianism? Who does she align with in intellectual history?
Jeff, you want to take that?
Well, Hannah Arendt, as Leon talked about, a study with Karl Jaspers and Martin Heidegger. And one of the things Karl Jaspers teaches her is to see the world as it exists in reality. And one of the things Hannah Arendt said was, all thinking comes from one's experience. And the thing that people don't know about Hannah Arendt is she joins the resistance in Berlin, working with the Zionist Organization of Germany, to expose the anti-Semitic propaganda that was coming out of Germany in the early 30s. She gets arrested by the Gestapo, gets out, escapes to France, joins Youth Aliyah to help Jewish kids get out and go to Palestine, and is interned when Germany invades France as a quote unquote enemy alien, and escapes again. She comes to this country. And in 1943, after learning about Auschwitz, she starts to question what happened. What happened? And she really unpacks a whole system that leads to this totalitarianism state. And to be perfectly honest, I think she really is unique in the 20th century in helping to explain what happened at such an early time, of developing a system of government, a system that took over everything, mass society, institutions. So there are other thinkers that come out that do deal with totalitarianism for sure, but she was one of the first. And I think that if we get into Eichmann in Jerusalem, she also really starts to explore evil, from radical evil to how evil, the banality of evil, if you will. At any rate, that's the long and the short of it in terms of who she was, and how, to be honest, when she comes to this country in the United States, and starts writing about what's happening in her newfound homeland of America, and looks at what's happening with McCarthyism, looks what happens at the abuse of power that the executive could enact during Watergate. She starts to write about the fault lines in American democracy. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of thinkers like Hannah Arendt, but to me, she's an incredible thinker, and her life's experience is an incredible example of what one person's courage can bring in this world.
I think
Great.
what
Thank you.
distinguishes her as a voice are several things that may fit together. Number one, when she grew up in Germany, she already was aware, as a Jew, that she was not an equal citizen. So she grew up in a political environment, a very fractured republic primarily, but with a long history of failed efforts to integrate the Jews as full citizens, and the constant coming forth of radical anti-Semitism. So she grew up with a recognition that somehow the idea of equality, political equality, was unavailable. She was an outsider. The second thing is that she didn't quite see what the exit from racial thinking would be. Frenchmen, Germans, Jews. Jews were caught between the religious and national identity. She also realized that the idea of assimilating, passing, was not available. The second thing that's important to her is that she was not, from an ideological point of view, enamored of Marx. She didn't think that labor, and labor, yes, in a certain sense, but not work, she was not an economic determinist. Therefore, she kept her distance from socialism and communism. And she had the idealized view of a public space where people could be citizens and where issues of class were somehow could be controlled by the realm of politics as independent from economics. And that made her a distinct voice in the 1950s in the United States, because there was the anti-communist left, and then there was the left, which was connected to socialism and communism. And so she had these outsiders' perspective, and had a real belief in the idea of democratic citizenship that was not inherited, but earned by allegiance not to a flag or to a group or to an ethnicity, but to a system of laws. And she developed, I think Jeff suggests this, a very idealistic picture of the possibilities of America. And that's one of the reasons why she broke with many Zionists, because she recognized she became a supporter of a binational state, because she didn't understand how you could possibly have democracy and Zionism put together if you didn't solve the differential between the Arab and the Jewish population. So she was a kind of unique figure. And the last thing I would say about her that makes her different is she is difficult to read, but she's readable. She never wrote. She was also a poet. So she never wrote in this convoluted, academic, dense, jargon-filled language that many theoreticians, philosophers, and politicians revel in. She was not, she had a PhD and all that, but she was not an academic. Her dissertation was on the concept of love in St. Augustine. Now, if that's not a prelude to having a conversation with a diverse group of people, she was, in that sense, uniquely capable of it.
President Botstein, let me ask you, and then I think Jeff will probably want to comment on this as well. You referenced that. I know in Jeff's film, which I've had the privilege to see, and it's an amazing film, and I hope all our viewers and readers seek it out. But he does mention in the film St. Augustine's "man is born, a beginning was made," taking that as a kind of an optimism, right, about changing the world. And if the film shows, how we fall towards totalitarianism, perhaps also the idea is to show how we might rise. Would you both give us some thoughts on that?
So I think you're absolutely right. So I think the end of the origins of totalitarianism, she always refers to, not always, but she refers to the idea of the renewal of humanity, that out of the ashes of the crematoria, that there's something more than rage, revenge, bitterness, but that the human being somehow is capable of making some kind of ethical progress. She was not a pessimist. She believed in somehow the way Rousseau did in a different way, the connection between ethics, compassion, and reason. So she believed thinking, which was dangerous, and speaking, and the freedom to do so, and the debate in the public space were an instrument of renewal, that language was the instrument of political renewal. Not our fists, not our power, not our animalistic power, but our ability to persuade. And in this country now, what is the most disturbing is the rigidity of people's thinking and speaking, the inability to empathetically hear the other person and find a way to persuade the other person that they're, maybe it isn't so, one way or the other. It isn't so clear to understand the ambiguities and the even narrow points of sameness. She also, I think, underestimated the selfishness, the greed, and the corruptibility. Now, she saw that in the Nazi Party. She saw that in fascism. But I somehow think that she had very high hopes for our ability to renew ourselves.
Thank you, Jeff.
Well, that was really well said, because she felt that true freedom was living in a plural society, plurality. She felt that to be free, you needed to be in a diverse society with people with very different opinions, good people and bad people. She felt that that was the true society that we should strive for. She believed really fiercely in civil disobedience, and Leon talks about that. Leon hasn't told you, and I'll very quickly sum up. When he was a student at Chicago, he was in the sit-in, and she came to pay a visit to him, and she truly saw the students of the 60s that I would think she would see students of today as people who could strive for that renewal, and that we hold the power of change in our own hands. And that's what she says in Love and St. Augustine. And yes, that the very last page, the very last paragraph of the 600-page book on origins of totalitarianism goes back to St. Augustine and love and plurality.
Jeff makes a very good point. And the one thing that listeners need to be aware of is that the precondition to do what Jeff describes is that you have to have political equality. The fact is, freedom is not something that exists before society. Freedom is something that's granted to you by the political arrangement. So totalitarian regimes that eliminate freedom, right? That eliminate dissent, as Jeff points out. So you have a single party, communism, single party, or fascism. That those regimes deprive. We often think as Americans we're free because we think, if there were no state, I can go Robinson Crusoe, I can go to an island, or I can, some imaginary circumstance by which I'm free naturally in some way. And she doesn't believe that she believes that the only way you can realize your human potential, the only reason you can have happiness is if you have political standing in your community.
President Botstein, inevitably, in the time that we're taping, then I have to ask you, in this delicate balancing act between freedom of speech, as you talk about, the ability to speak civilly and listen to one another, and anti-Semitism. I mean, these are the cruxes of her work as the president of a college. And we're at the time we're taping, we see Columbia with one answer, Harvard with another answer, all in the news, how we balance freedoms and in particular anti-Semitism. Comment from you.
Yeah, so let me be very brief because I don't want to take too much time. Number one, I think the use of anti-Semitism to justify the overreach by the Trump administration is not only deceitful, it is the most anti-Semitic thing I can imagine. It recalls an old history of blaming the Jews, and then this assault on the American university is somehow to protect us from what? As a European Jew coming to America, I never expected a world without anti-Semitism. Second, that there is no justification, in my view, for compromising with an assault on freedom. That one of the things that tyrants know how to do is instill fear. She writes brilliantly about why secret police, why frightening people, like the use of ICE to deport, that fear makes people withdraw from the public sphere, and they leave the room in the vacuum for the abuse of power. And when you do that, you create terrible consequences. And we can't rely on heroes. In other words, that's the whole point in the Eichmann book. The Eichmann book is that evil became normalized. And if we self-censor ourselves and we don't call it out for what it is, and the fact is there's more at stake at the university than money. All the people who are trying to convince Harvard to go back to the table is illegitimate. America has benefited. Trump is not a patriot. The scientific progress, the industrial progress of America in the 20th and 21st century is entirely due to a collaboration between government and private enterprise embodied in the university, state and private universities. And it is simply a destructive intent to do with language. Your mention of Orwell is in that sense superficially apt, because Trump is a master of using language to distort reality and actually to lie. You can't have a democracy without some shared criterion of truth. Who invaded Ukraine? Who started that war? These are not issues that can't be debated, but there is an answer, one which is more largely truthful than the other. And so it seems to me that in this current moment, universities have to stand up for their own independence. And I believe the American people will side with them. We've done a bad job in communicating with the public and making them like us for what we do. And the anti-Semitism that has bubbled up in America comes to me as no surprise. So I'm the wrong person to ask. But I think anti-Semitism wasn't grown in the university. It wasn't started in the university. America has a long history of anti-Semitism. And also there's a long history of Jewish anti-Zionism. No one should be surprised that many of the protesters against Israel are Jewish, because they actually reflect a long history of America before 48 that was not pro-Zionist.
President Botstein, when you were speaking there, and thank you for a very clear course through something that I think has been bedeviling a lot of us as we think about what's been going on the campuses. But you reminded me of one of my favorite quotations from Daniel Patrick Moynihan, that you are entitled to your own opinion. You are not entitled to your own facts.
And the other thing is that universities, big research universities, have lost a certain contact with their student bodies, which make it very difficult for them. The scale of these large universities makes governing them, when you have things like social media and things inflame, very, very difficult. I do not envy my colleagues running these big institutions, where anonymity is the nature of the experience. And so it is a very sad time. And but the idea that this attack is under the mask of fighting anti-Semitism is, to me, as a survivor, part of a saving remnant of a community that was obliterated by anti-Semitism, is shocking and callous. There's a great piece in the New York Review of Books by Christopher Browning, who is the leading historian of the Holocaust. And it's very succinct, and he makes this point. He's not Jewish, as far as I know, but a real scholar of the Holocaust. He wrote a wonderful book called Ordinary Men, and influenced by Arendt, actually, but where the idea that this is a legitimate reason, it's only a setup for us ultimately to be scapegoated more in the future.
President Botstein, in our last few minutes, a quick question I promised I would ask then. Eichmann on trial, what? For our busy, challenged viewers and readers, if there's one work they should seek out, what would you recommend?
Well, I would ask Jeff what he thinks. I'm curious what his response to that would be.
Well, Hannah Arendt wrote an essay. It was a work that came truly from her heart, and the experience she went through, called "We Refugees." She wrote this essay. It came out in 1943, I think, and it was about what happens to people when they are pushed out of their homeland and become stateless, and they have no rights. And it's about herself, but it's really about what's happening today in our society, with a huge migration of people who are being pushed out and rejected. And that's something I think that people will understand and grasp. And it's a 10-page essay that I think actually was in not New York Review of Books, somewhere else. But that's one thing I would recommend. I mean, there's the books she wrote, from Origins to The Human Condition to The Crisis of the Republic, about our country today, are great. But I would suggest take a look at We Refugees.
Thank you.
No, the revival of Arendt's work after her death came as a surprise to most of us who studied with her, and she's become really the most celebrated figure of her generation. I would recommend, it's a little heavier going, but I think Jeff is right. The shorter things are good, but The Human Condition, which are her Walgreen lectures from the 50s, um, have had the most appeal to people looking to read a philosopher to help them as individuals figure out what's happening around them. And that's a very fine book. I think it can be an inspirational book. She's deceptively easy to read. So the great joy of reading Arendt is you don't have to rush through. There's no plot. There's no body at the end. There's no thief gets caught. You can, but it's not turgid. It's not daunting, and she doesn't clobber you with what you don't know. She's keen for you to follow her argument, which means she's not trying to intimidate you to thinking she's right by hammering you with all of her learning. You follow me?
Yes, indeed. Well, now I'm going to close this with I have the particular privilege to be talking with two really musically adept and professionally esteemed uh, guests today, and we'll practice a little Proustian synesthesia here. President Botstein, if there you are a marvelous longtime conductor. Is there a musical piece that to you is your Madeleine for how things are today in the world related to our discussion? Anything that comes to mind?
No, it's hard to ask a musician that because they're usually concerned with what they're working on now. Um, I do think that music is still part of the public space that people with diverse attitudes can join in together is still a common ground because what it means or what it signifies isn't obvious. It's not a flag, it's not a picture, it doesn't show gender, race, nationality. It has, you can hear if it's from this part of the world or that part of the world, but when you absorb it over time, duration of music, you make it your own, and therefore it is a public art form. So I think music is best supported by people coming together. We have so few occasions by which we're physically together, whatever the music may be, whether it's a band or musical or classical, it doesn't make a difference. That where you can share your private and public experience without fear of contradiction and although you bring away from it different meanings. So music is a great and very vital instrument in dark times.
Thank you, Jeff. A closing thought from you as a professional clarinetist and among other instruments you've played. Anything comes to your mind?
Yeah, I would swing actually to another wind instrument. I would first pour myself a really good glass of scotch, light up one of Leon's cigars, and put on one of my favorite albums by Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. Uh, and then at least that would be something that would be very soothing right now while you're dealing with very chaotic times.
Thank you. Gentlemen, it's been a great pleasure, and you've hit a lot of really important notes for us. President Botstein, I really appreciate what you're doing to uphold, intellectual curiosity and freedom in this country. Thank you for being here today.
Well, I look forward to Jeff's film. And how long is it?
It's 90 minutes.
Oh,
And we can do this, folks. We can do this on June 27th, 9 p.m., public television nationally. Jeff Bieber, thank you for joining us today as well.
Thank you for having
Dalton.
us.
My pleasure.
And viewers, if this conversation and conversations like it matter to you, please support your local journalism, such as the Berkshire Eagle. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. If you're not yet, please consider becoming one. It's how we conduct conversations such as this. It's how we help keep the flame of local journalism alive in a time that feels as if Hannah Arendt is alive too. I'm Dalton Delan. I'll see you next time on Eagle Reels and in the pages of the Berkshire Eagle.